Okay, the Shana Tova. I am Rabbi Michael, and before we even start the service, I want to say how wonderful it is to see everyone here. And where shall I begin? Well, it began a couple of weeks ago at the tennis court. I was at the C Street Park, and I noticed that there were hundreds of birds on top of the telephone wires. And all of a sudden, there was a little noise, and the birds started flying in the same direction. And then the noise dissipated, and the birds returned exactly to where they were standing before. And I was observing this, and it occurred to me that that this is rather fascinating. Isn't it fascinating to see how birds communicate to each other in that manner? It's almost as if their brain creates what's called an avian internet. That's what I call it. An avian internet. Their brains send out electronic pulses, and they have almost a hive mentality. And there are a lot of creatures in nature that have this kind of mentality. You can take a look, for instance, at ants. You could take a look, for instance, at bees. And that's how they make honey. And it's fascinating to see how different species think as a collective. And so the thought occurred to me, and I wondered, does this happen with human beings? Or more specifically, does this happen with Jews? Well, actually, I think it does. When you take a look at the high holidays, all of a sudden, no matter what we're doing, no matter what our background is, it's almost as though we feel the hive summoning us to come together as a community and worship together. Only that. And so are we that different from nature? Well, as you'll see with my sermon coming up, we're part of nature. And there's a lot of nature that applies to us as well. But the fact that we're all here is more than just a fortuitous accident. There is a rhyme and reason to why we feel this yearning to reconnect with God at this particular time of the year. All right, let's turn now to the candle lighting. Do we have candles here? Okay, let's call the ladies up, and we're going to light candles. I think we have candles here already.
Do you have candles?
Sure.
I got a little word there from you.
We're going to bring it down.
Okay, now the blessings are a little bit different than what we normally say, so we'll help you with the blessings.
Thank you for the honor. Right there. Right there. Oh, you got it. I'm sorry. I'm nervous.
Oh, that's
My heart never beats.
These matches are a pain.
Thank you, Mark.
going to say the blessing together. I'll help you in the blessing.
Lead us.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu
La'adonai Shalom Tov. All the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'echanu v'kivanu v'higanu l'sam haseh. Everyone give each other a blessing.
Good to see you.
Yo las vendo en la casa. Ya, Shana Tova otra vez.
Laura, give me temporary to get the drum.
Shana Tova. Shana Tova. I'll be around more. I'm getting my schedule together finally. Driving buses.
Get a couple temporary.
It's always a challenge, but I'm doing it.
All right. Okay, let's turn now to page 9 in our black prayer books. It should be black, not red. It says the new Matzah on it. It's called Matzah Chadash. And you'll find this on page 9. Everyone take a seat. Make yourselves comfortable. Okay, Ma Tohu Olecha Yaakov Mishkenotecha Yisrael Ma Tohu Olecha Yaakov Mishkenotecha Yisrael. How goodly are your dwellings, O Jacob, your sanctuaries, O Israel. Thanks to your abundant kindness, O Lord, I am able to enter your house. To bow down before you in reverence in this sacred place of worship. Lord, I love to be in your house, the sanctuary dedicated to your glory. Here I worship in your presence, O Lord, my Maker. In kindness, Lord, answer my prayer mercifully and grant me your abiding help. Va'ani tefilati lecha Adonai ein ratzon Elohim v'rov v'rov chazdecha aneni v'yishecha. All right. Let's turn now to the Baruch Hu. And this is on page 18. And this is where we stand together as a community and affirm what is common. You know, the word community comes from the same word as common. It's what we share in common with one another. And we have a little English song. It's not in the prayer book, but it's easy to learn. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day, day turns to night. Boreyo bolayla, goleo mipnei choshech. וחושך מפני אור, וחושך מפני אור. אל חי וחיים, תמיד ימוך עלינו לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני, אמרי וערבי. Let's turn down to page 20. Avat olam, Beit Yisrael. With everlasting love, you love your people Israel, teaching us the Torah and its mitzvot, instructing us in its laws and judgments. This particular prayer is a love song. And, you know, if we were to pay attention to love songs, we might find out that love songs can convey some very powerful spiritual lessons. What's one of the most important lessons love songs convey? The idea that we are lonely creatures. A love song expresses a desire, oftentimes, to overcome our human aloneness and a desire for unity. And as we experience this, Jewish mystics tell us that God also experiences a desire to overcome his aloneness by entering into relationship with us. Ki hem chayenu v'yorech yameinu v'hem negi yamim v'layla Bavat chatasim en el-elamim baruch atah Adonai Ohevamo Yisrael. Everyone put your right hand over your eyes, say after me. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Echad Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Elam Va'ed Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha V'chol v'chol nafshecha v'chol yadecha v'hayu advarim ha'ele asher nochi mitzvah hayom al levavecha v'shnatam levanecha v'dibartam bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha v'techa b'derech v'shokbecha v'uvkemecha v'kshartam lot al yadecha v'hayu l'totafot beinecha v'uchatavtam Am Mizazot Beitecha Uvisharecha. Now, if you look at the Shema prayer, you notice that the word Shema has the letter Ayin, which is enlarged. And then you have the Dalet of the word Echad, which is also enlarged. So let me ask you a question. Why are these two letters enlarged? I know what you're thinking. The scribe had too much ink and he didn't know what to do with it, so he enlarged the letters. Well, probably not. But if you take the two letters and you combine them together, they form an anagram. And what is the anagram? The word is aid, which means a witness. Now, you know how you say witness in Greek? The witness is a martyr. And Jews traditionally have been persecuted and died saying the words of the Shema as their last uttering statement. And so the Shema is a reminder that we are witnesses to God, to God's presence in the world. Now, when you're called up for jury duty, how many of you like being called up for jury duty? Well, some of you might. Okay. I particularly don't. But you see, the witness is compelled by law to bear witness. In Jewish tradition, the witnesses carry out the verdicts of the court. In the case of capital punishment, the witnesses must execute the criminal. Now, if we had that today, I'm sure we would not have any problem with perjury. The court systems would be very different. Let's turn now to the end of the Shema, which talks about the exodus out of Egypt. למען תזכרו ועשיתם מקום מצותי, והייתי קדושים לבריכם אני, אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם, מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, amen. Everybody make eye contact with your neighbor, say after me, Adonai Elohechem, amen. Your God is a God of truth. Let's turn now to page on page 28. Everyone stand. Let's pray for peace. We're living in wondrous times in some respects. Even though the world is observing a war between Ukraine and Russia, who could imagine that the Israelis and the Arabs have established economic, cultural, and even military agreements with one another, living for the first time in a state of peace. Let's pray for world peace. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu, Shalom, Shalom, V'amidenu Malkeinu L'chayim, Shalom, Shalom. Uvros aleinu tzedkat shlomecha. Uvros aleinu tzedkat shlomecha. Amen. Shelter us beneath your wings, O Adonai. Guard us from all harmful things, O Adonai. Keep us safe throughout the night, till we wake with morning's light. Teach us, God, wrong from right. Amen. 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 Uvros aleinu tzedkat shlomecha. Uvros aleinu tzedkat shlomecha. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'parasek Hashem, aleinu v'kol Yisrael, v'Yerushalayim. Okay, everyone please rise and turn to page 33. Let's say these words together. Tiku b'chodesh shofar. You got it. Tiku b'chodesh shofar. B'chesed yom chagenu. Ki chok l'Yisrael. U'mishpat l'elhei Yaakov. Okay, let's turn now to page 34. Feel free to recite the Half Kaddish with me. Yitkadal v'yitkadal shemei ravo Yamod baruch yivitei v'yamlik malchutei v'chayechom v'yamechom
Ukayem b'kol bet
Yisrael V'agala v'agala
U'mitzman karim
V'imru Yishmei Rabba Menorah Le'ela, min kol brechata b'shirata, dus brechata v'mata damiran v'yama imru. Amen. Now the prayer here is a little different than it is on Shabbat. And this prayer is called Amida. It's a standing prayer. And it's a prayer where we imagine ourselves standing in God's presence. So this whole prayer is going to be said quietly and meditatively by you and me. You'll find this on page 36. And it goes all the way up to page 46. When you finish, please turn to page 50. Yitkadav yikadash merva, v'yam adavar achirtei, v'yam amachotei, v'chayichon, v'chayichon v'yisrael, v'gol v'zman kori v'ramein, yishmei rabba v'vorach, alol v'elamaya, yidvarach v'yishtabrach v'yitav v'yitramam v'yinasei, v'yadar v'yitalim v'talal shmei kutsha v'yichu, le'ela, le'ela, v'yinkav v'chata v'shata, v'shachata v'nahamata, da'am yam yamam v'yiramein, Tikal v'tzalot ha'uva uva, E'o Yisrael, Kadam b'chuhom, v'yishamayim, E'imra ha'amen, Yehish tamarah, v'yishamaya, V'chayim aleinu, V'alchol Yisrael, Please take a seat. Make yourselves comfy. Pepsi Cola has never been much of a popular drink in Israel, at least during the 1980s, during the Arab boycott. But eventually, Pepsi returned to Israel, but there was still a little bit of hesitancy on the part of Israelis, some because of political reasons, but others because of religious reasons. Religious reasons? What's with that? Well, it all came down to a commercial, an advertisement that Pepsi depicted the evolutionary ladder, as it were. Picture a primate, a chimpanzee, a gorilla, and then you have a human being, and the highest human being, according to Pepsi, was the person who was holding a Pepsi Cola in their hand. It's rather amusing. And the ultra-Orthodox in Israel took offense to that because they do not believe that we come from the ape. In fact, they believe we all come from Adam and Eve. But you know, they're not the only ones who think that way. If you go to Alabama and you take a look, for instance, at some of the science books, you'll find a disclaimer to the theory of evolution. And where do we come from? Do we come from lower forms of life, or are we descendants of Adam and Eve? How do we reconcile these two opposite perspectives? Tonight, the year 5783, it marks the beginning of a new year. But let's be honest. Are we saying that the world is really 5,783 years old? How do we reconcile this with scientific reality? To be more specific, who are we fooling? How can modern Jews celebrate a holiday that commemorates Adam and Eve's birthday in a world where we know that God did not create the world in just 6 days? So are we gathered this evening in the synagogue to celebrate fairy tales and myths about the world of make-believe? But the answer to this question is a little bit more nuanced. If we take a look at the word myth, it comes from the Greek word mythos. But what exactly is mythos? Mythos means a story. It's an interpretation of how our world came into existence. It's a story, an interpretation of how our present world assumed the form it now has today. And in the age of the Greeks, science was also considered a type of mythos, in the sense that it is an attempt to explain man's place in the cosmos. So when you look at the Bible and you look at science, they actually have something in common. And what do they have in common? They're trying to understand, each tradition is trying to understand who we are and what our place is in the universe. Now science arguably looks at only the physical causes that brought the world into being. Religion, on the other hand, tries to understand the spiritual, and moral, and ethical nexus that we have of all things. Now let me say and make it very, very clear. The Torah is not a book of science. But it is meant to serve as a guide for moral and ethical living. So what's really the difference between science and religion? Well, some of you may have heard about the blind men from India trying to figure out and examine an elephant. One person felt the leg and said, it's a tree. Another touched the ear and said, it's a fan. Another person felt the trunk and said, it's a water pipe. And the last blind man felt the tail and said, it is a rope. And so according to Paul Davies, one of the great astrophysicists, he says this is really the typical approach of science, is to look at only the bare fundamentals of a thing. Does not try to understand that the idea that the elephant is greater than the sum of all of its parts. It just examines the parts. This is what's called scientific reductionism. And yet, is a human being merely a compilation of physical elements and nothing more? Einstein wrote in one of his popular essays that God is the inactive but divine system of order. But he also believed that religion has something of value to convey. And he said the science about religion is lame, but religion without science is blind. You know, back in 1925, there was a very controversial article that Dr. Charles Mayo wrote, and he wanted to know, what is man? And so he said that the average person is about 5'10" tall and weighs about 150 pounds. Well, most of us are probably a little heavier than that today. But there's enough fat in the average person to make 7 bars of soap, enough iron to make a medium-sized nail, enough sugar to fill a shaker, enough lime to whitewash a chicken coop, enough phosphorus to make 2,200 matchtips, enough magnesium for a dose of magnesia, and enough potassium to ignite a toy cannon. So if you take the total value of what is man, how much was a person worth back in 1925? Well, he came up with the number 98 cents. But isn't it amazing that 98 cents can produce an Albert Einstein, and Mother Teresa, a Moses, a Buddha, a Jesus, or whoever, your mother and father, are worth a lot more than just 98 cents. And we take a look at modern genetics, it becomes even more interesting. Take mice, for example. Did you know that the average human being has 97.5% of their working DNA in common with mice? And this is one of the reasons why a lot of the pharmaceutical experiments involve mice. You want to hear something even more interesting? Pigs. The similarity between pigs and human beings. I know what you're thinking. George Orwell, Animal Farm. No, I'm not referring to that. Pigs and human beings have 98% DNA compatibility. And this is one of the reasons why a heart transplant can often involve the use of a pig valve. Today I will tell you the story of my first rabbi emeritus in San Francisco. He used to tell me, he was very proud of it, he says, I'm not kosher, Rabbi, because I had a heart transplant, and part of my heart is made up of pork. Now, when we take a look at gorillas, there we find that the human genome has about 98% of what human beings have. And that's almost as much as what we share with chimpanzees. But what does Rosh Hashanah really teach us? Rosh Hashanah teaches us that we're more than just the sum of our genetic parts in history. But Alfred Lord Tennyson in the 19th century said, nature is a world of strife and conflict and violence, red in tooth and claw. And you take a look at the rise of Nazism, which applied the concept of social Darwinianism. The idea that primitive societies must be eliminated in favor of superior societies. So is science necessarily superior to religion? Not necessarily. Dr. Chaim Ginot was wrote a book between parent and child. He was an educator, and he said, "Dear teachers, I am a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes have seen what no person should ever see or witness. Gas chambers were produced by learned engineers. Children were poisoned by educated physicians. Infants were murdered by skilled and trained nurses. Women and babies shot and burned by high school and college graduates. So I am suspicious of education. My request to you as teachers, help your student become more human. Your efforts must never produce monsters, skilled psychopaths, or educated Eichmanns. Reading and writing and arithmetic are important only if they succeed in making us more humane towards each other." And so when you take a look at the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, what do we discover? Creation of Adam. And isn't it remarkable that God did not create a society of human beings? Isn't it amazing that God created one person in the world to teach us that each individual is worth an entire world? And to save a human life, Jewish tradition later teaches us in the Mishnah, when you save one human life, when you rescue somebody from a life of degradation and poverty, it's almost as if you've saved an entire world. This is really the deeper message of Rosh Hashanah, is that God has a biocentric interest in each and every one of us. And that one of the most important things that we need to learn, as the humanist Albert Schweitzer once said, is how to treat life with reverence and respect. Going beyond that, let's apply Albert Schweitzer's wisdom to not just human life, but to all life on our planet. And with that thought, I want to wish you all Lashana Tova V'Tukah, a year that's new and good. And may we embrace God's goodness in making the world a better place for all of us. Shana Tova. Okay, let's turn now. Okay, let's turn now to the Aleinu. And then we call it quits. What page is the Aleinu? Tell you in just a moment. Page 59. Please rise. Aleinu Shabbat Ladon HaKol V'Dei Ku'Lal Yosef Rishit Shelo Zan K'Bei Arasol V'Lo Samanu Shemishrat Adama Shelo Sotchokei Kohen V'Go Aleinu K'Chavanam V'Nachnu Korim V'Shlachim Imodim V'Dei Melech Malchei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shuna B'Shamayim V'Yaseh B'Chavet V'Moshe V'Gadol V'Shamayim V'Chavet Let's pray for the enlightenment of our planet. Is there anyone observing Yahrzeit tonight? If not, we'll say the Kaddish for all our loved ones on page 64. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabah v'yamad v'barach yirtei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechod v'meichon v'chayed v'chol beit Yisrael v'agala v'zmakorei v'mrim amein v'hei shmei rabah v'barach v'lam v'lamei l'maya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'al v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yadar v'yitali v'talal shmei v'kudsha v'richu Le'ela minkol v'chata v'shirata v'shachata v'na'amata v'na'amira v'yamal v'mrim amein Yehi shalom arav min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'ako Yisrael v'mrim amein v'oseh shalom v'mrimav v'yaseh shalom aleinu v'ako Yisrael v'mrim amein. Okay, everyone, we're going to stand up. We're going to wish each other a Shana Tova. Okay, everyone say after me. Shake hands with your neighbors after me. Lishana Tova to you. Shake one hand with one neighbor and shake hands with another neighbor. To you, to you. Lishana Tova to you and to you. We wish you a good year. We wish you